A peaceful afternoon in the park takes an unexpected turn when a gang targets the wrong woman, an elite Navy SEAL who turns their arrogance into humiliation. What happens next will leave you speechless. Subscribe now for more stories that inspire and empower. In the golden haze of a warm afternoon, the serenity of Lincoln Park was the perfect escape for Tasha. The park, a peaceful suburban sanctuary, was filled with families enjoying the sun, joggers maintaining their pace, and the occasional dog barking in delight. Tasha, in her fitted navy sweatshirt and black joggers, blended effortlessly into the crowd, her calm demeanor belying the formidable strength she carried. She walked the familiar path, earbuds tucked in, the sound of her morning workout playlist playing softly in the background. She could have been just another woman out for a stroll, savoring the simplicity of the day, but beneath her relaxed exterior lay a warrior's mind, honed by years of Navy SEAL training. As she neared the quieter, shaded stretch of the park, where towering oaks lined the paths, her peace was suddenly interrupted. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a group of 5 men lingering near a graffiti-covered bench. Their loud voices and exaggerated gestures caught her attention, though she kept walking, not yet reacting. But instinct, sharpened by years of discipline, told her something wasn't right. The men's gaze shifted to her, their eyes scanning her with predatory intent. One of them muttered something under his breath, and their body language shifted. This was no longer just idle chatter. The gang leader, a wiry man with a shaved head and tattoos snaking up his arms, made the first move. With a look of smug arrogance, he stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Hey, sweetheart," he called, his tone dripping with mock sweetness. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" Tasha didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed calm, assessing them with a practiced gaze. She didn't engage, adjusting her earbuds as if she hadn't heard, her movements fluid and controlled. She resumed walking, maintaining her composure, but the group wasn't going to let her go so easily. In that moment, Tasha's mind raced, not with fear, but with calculation. She wasn't the target they thought she was. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As Tasha moved forward, the tension in the air thickened. The gang's leader stepped closer, blocking her path once again, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He misread her silence as hesitation, and it only emboldened him. "What's the matter, babe? Cat got your tongue?" he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. The others laughed, egging him on, and for a brief moment Tasha could feel the pressure of their eyes on her, yet her pulse remained steady, her breathing calm and controlled. Tasha's instincts sharpened. Years of training had taught her how to navigate high-stakes situations, how to assess a threat with cold precision. She wasn't alone in this moment. The weight of their gaze didn't shake her resolve. She stood firm, unmoving, and with one glance she scanned her surroundings. She noted the joggers nearby, a mother and her child making their way to the playground, the older couple sitting on a bench, pretending not to notice the brewing conflict. In a split second, she calculated the risks, how to protect the bystanders, how to neutralize the threat, and how to walk away unscathed. Without saying a word, she finally spoke. Her voice was calm but unmistakably firm, like a warning shot across their bow. "Back off," she said, her eyes locking with the leaders. The words hung in the air, sharp and clear, but the leader only smirked, his arrogance mounting. He took a step closer, his posture cocky, and his voice dropped lower, attempting to provoke her further. "What if I don't?" he growled, invading her personal space. Tasha didn't flinch. She held her ground. "This is your last warning," she said, her tone unwavering. Her calmness only seemed to frustrate him more. The leader, desperate to maintain control, reached out, brushing against her arm in a move that was meant to be intimidating. It was the mistake he'd been waiting to make. In an instant, Tasha stepped back with precision, making him stumble forward awkwardly. The gang's laughter faltered, and for the first time, uncertainty rippled through their ranks. What had started as an attempt at intimidation was quickly turning into their humiliation. They had no idea what they were up against. Tasha's every move was deliberate, fluid, and far more controlled than any of them could anticipate. The leader's hesitation was brief, but enough for Tasha to read the shift in their energy. His smirk was gone now, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The others followed his lead, their cocky bravado starting to unravel. One of them, the lanky man with the nervous laugh, looked around uneasily, as if he realized how out of place they were. Yet the leader was too proud to back down, too determined to maintain control in front of his gang. "She's just trying to play tough," the lanky one muttered, shifting his weight nervously. But his attempt to cover up his doubt only made the others more unsure. The leader's pride was on the line, and that was something Tasha could see clearly. He wasn't used to being challenged, let alone outmatched by someone he deemed as weaker. His next move came without thinking, an aggressive lunge toward her, hoping to catch her off guard. It was sloppy. Tasha sidestepped effortlessly, using his own momentum against him. He stumbled, arms flailing, almost tripping over his feet. The sound of his failure rang louder than his words. Tasha didn't move to strike. There was no need. His friends burst into confused laughter, still unsure of what had just transpired. But Tasha was calm, calculating, and ready. She was a living, breathing lesson in self-discipline. The leader gritted his teeth, eyes narrowed in frustration. "You're a piece of work," he sneered, trying to regain some semblance of authority. His voice was thick with anger, but now it was tinged with embarrassment. His gang wasn't backing him up like they had before. One by one, they exchanged uneasy glances, all too aware of the shift in control. Tasha didn't let up. She moved further into her defensive stance, still as composed as before. The others hesitated now, each of them sizing her up, but none willing to risk what the leader had. The confidence that had once flowed freely from their gang was now cracking. Tasha, on the other hand, stood taller, her strength emanating in every controlled breath. "You're making a mistake," Tasha warned, her words cutting through the tension. She knew she didn't need to start a fight, but if one of them made the wrong move, she would be ready. The leader, now visibly rattled, wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to mask the unease building within him. He stepped back slightly, as though unsure of how to proceed. The laughter that had once filled the air had died down, replaced by the uncomfortable silence of a crowd watching the scene unfold. A few people in the park, sensing the tension, had stopped to watch, their phones already out, recording the exchange. "Are you done?" Tasha asked, her voice calm but laced with a firm authority that made the leader pause. His gang, which had once seemed like an unstoppable force, now appeared like a group of children play-acting at strength. It was clear that Tasha had shifted the dynamics completely. The men who once thought they held power were now doubting their own choices. Tasha's calm, collected presence had shattered their illusion of dominance. "Listen, we don't have to do this," the lanky one muttered, his voice faltering as he tried to distance himself from the escalating situation. Tasha's eyes flicked to him, sensing his wavering resolve, but the leader wasn't finished. With a growl, he lunged at her again, his movements frantic and fueled by the need to save face. His actions were sloppy, desperation clouding his judgment. Tasha was ready. In one swift motion, Tasha sidestepped again, her body moving like water, fluid and graceful. She grabbed the leader's arm, using his momentum to guide him toward the ground. He hit the grass hard, the air leaving his lungs with a loud whoosh. The other men froze, their bravado now gone. For the first time in this entire exchange, the leader's voice shook. "What? What the hell is wrong with you?" he spat, his face red with embarrassment. He tried to scramble to his feet, but his body was weak from the shock of his own failure. Tasha's gaze didn't waver. She had shown them more than enough mercy already. "You had your chance," she said coolly, "but now you're done." The remaining men hesitated, fear now creeping into their posture as the realization of their situation set in. Tasha, standing tall and unwavering, had become the embodiment of control, of strength that was both mental and physical. The crowd around them had grown, people now gathering in curiosity and disbelief. And yet Tasha wasn't interested in being the spectacle. Her only focus was ensuring this didn't escalate further. She moved to stand between the gang and the growing crowd, signaling that she had everything under control. It was a quiet power that spoke volumes without needing to shout. As the leader struggled to regain his footing, his face contorted with frustration, Tasha stood tall, unwavering. The group of men who had initially surrounded her with their swagger and mockery now found themselves scattered and broken. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and the realization hit them all at once. They were no longer the predators, they were the prey. The leader, his chest heaving with anger and humiliation, shot a glance at his crew. They were visibly shaken, their bravado long gone. One of them, still on the ground clutching his wrist, muttered something about leaving. The leader snapped his attention back to Tasha, trying to summon whatever authority he had left, but the words came out weak. "You think this is over?" he snarled, his voice strained. Tasha didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, piercing through him like a calm, controlled storm. "It's over for you," she said, her voice low and decisive, every syllable carrying the weight of truth. "And it's over for all of you the moment you decided to target the wrong person." Her words hung in the air, like the calm before the storm had passed and the consequences had settled in. The bystanders who had been watching the scene unfold now began murmuring among themselves. Whispers of disbelief and admiration spread through the crowd. Some people had already pulled out their phones, capturing the moment, while others were more focused on the gang's rapid downfall. Tasha's measured movements and unwavering composure had inspired something in them. Respect, recognition, maybe even courage. The sense of empowerment was palpable. As the police sirens grew louder, approaching rapidly, the gang's leader finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. The hum of the crowd, the chatter of the onlookers, and the nearing sirens had effectively sealed their fate. The one remaining man who hadn't yet backed down, finally seeing the inevitable, took a few steps back, his resolve crumbling. "I'm out," he muttered, the fear in his voice unmistakable as he turned to retreat. The others, still reeling from the humiliation, followed suit, their heads lowered in defeat. Tasha didn't respond to them, her gaze lingering on the retreating figures as the remaining gang members scurried off, defeated by the single woman they had tried to intimidate. As the last of the gang members retreated, their defeated forms vanishing into the distance, Tasha stood still, her heart rate slowly returning to normal, though the adrenaline still thrummed in her veins. The once tense atmosphere in the park was now charged with an unspoken sense of victory, and she could feel the shift in the energy around her. The park, which had felt like a battleground moments ago, now hummed with a quiet sense of relief. But Tasha knew better than to feel completely at ease. She wasn't just any woman standing her ground. She had just shown the world how to reclaim power in an instant. The sirens blared louder as 2 patrol cars arrived at the scene, screeching to a halt in front of Tasha. Officers spilled out, their uniforms crisp against the quiet backdrop of the park. Tasha stood firmly in place, her eyes scanning the officers as they approached. They didn't look like they expected a confrontation of this magnitude, but their gaze shifted from the men sprawled out on the ground to Tasha, who stood confidently at the center of it all. One officer, a tall man with sharp features, took a few steps forward, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Ma'am, what's going on here?" His voice was steady, but there was a slight hesitance, perhaps as he tried to piece together what had happened in the moments before their arrival. Tasha, her hands still relaxed at her sides, addressed the officer without missing a beat. "They approached me, tried to intimidate me, and when I warned them multiple times to back off, they made physical contact. I defended myself," she said, her tone calm, but carrying a firm conviction that left no room for doubt. The officer nodded, his expression unreadable, as he turned his gaze to the gang, now scattered on the ground, nursing their wounds. He waved over to the other officers, signaling them to secure the area and take the men into custody. The leader, still struggling to regain his composure, muttered angrily from the ground, trying to save face. "She attacked us. We didn't even touch her." His voice was hoarse with frustration. Tasha's eyes flicked toward him, but there was no anger in her gaze, only calm, steady resolve. "I didn't attack you. You attacked me, with your words, your actions. You thought you could intimidate me. You were wrong." The officer turned back to Tasha, his tone softening slightly. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice now respectful. Tasha shook her head, her expression never changing. "I'm fine." She watched as the police officers began to take charge of the scene. The gang members, now in cuffs, were being led to the patrol cars. The leader's face twisted with rage, his earlier arrogance completely shattered. He shot Tasha one last glare, but this time there was no bravado left in it. It was pure humiliation, and Tasha couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the tables had turned so completely. As the police took over, the crowd of bystanders began to disperse, though a few lingered, their faces filled with admiration and awe. One of the onlookers, a man in his 40s, approached her with a wide grin on his face. "That was incredible! I've never seen someone handle a situation like that before. You really put them in their place." Tasha offered a faint smile, but she didn't seek recognition. Her actions hadn't been driven by a desire for attention or praise. They had been instinctual, an embodiment of everything she had been trained to do. The looks of surprise and respect from the crowd were enough. That was all the validation she needed. As she watched the officers secure the last of the gang members and prepare to leave the scene, she felt a sense of purpose settle over her. The event wasn't just about a confrontation in a park. It was about standing firm in the face of injustice, even when the odds were stacked against you. It was about knowing when to speak up and when to step back, and the courage to act when it mattered most. A young girl, no older than 16, approached her hesitantly. Her eyes were wide with admiration as she spoke in a soft voice. "How did you learn to do all that? How did you know how to stand up to them like that?" Tasha crouched down to meet the girl's eyes, her expression softening. "It's not just about training, it's about choice. Every day you choose to rise above fear, to stand up for what's right. It's not easy, but it's always worth it." The girl nodded, taking in every word. "I want to be like you," she said, her voice filled with awe. Tasha smiled. "You will be," she replied gently. "Everyone has that strength inside them. Just remember to use it for the right reasons." As the girl walked away, Tasha stood, watching the last of the bystanders leave. The day was far from over, but Tasha knew she had just made a difference. For herself, for those who had witnessed her actions, and for anyone who would hear the story of a woman who stood tall in the face of aggression, she had reminded them all that power was never about size or strength. It was about presence, composure, and the ability to stand up for what was right. As Tasha walked toward the exit of the park, her mind settled, knowing that the world had just shifted, even if only by a small measure. As the officers finished securing the scene and the last patrol car pulled away, Tasha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. The tension in the air had dissipated, but the echoes of what had just transpired remained, hanging in the atmosphere like a quiet reminder. The park, once filled with the sounds of taunts and intimidation, had returned to its usual rhythm, but something was different now. People passed by, still glancing over at Tasha, as if to ensure the world was safe once again. She stood there for a moment, surveying the area, reflecting on the event. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't set out to be anyone's hero. But in that split second when those men had approached her, threatening to escalate the situation, she had chosen to act. Not out of anger, not out of a desire to prove herself, but out of principle. The principle that no one, no matter who they were, had the right to intimidate or harm others without consequences. It wasn't about violence. It was about standing her ground, protecting herself, and sending a message. Tasha's gaze softened as she looked around the park. She had grown used to being in situations where her physical prowess had made a difference, where she had been trained to fight, to defend. But moments like this one were different. They required a balance of power and grace, of strength and composure, and as she glanced at the people walking by, some still lingering in small groups, whispering about what had happened, she realized that her actions had not only made an impact on the men who had targeted her, but on the people who had witnessed it. They had seen her stand tall, calmly and decisively. They had seen the power of composure in the face of aggression. It wasn't just about the fight, it was about the message she had conveyed. And it was a message that deep down she knew would resonate long after the day was over. The young girl's words echoed in her mind. "I want to be like you." Tasha had inspired her, but she knew that this wasn't about her. It was about everyone finding the strength to stand up for themselves, to speak up when they saw injustice, to know that their voice, their presence, mattered. As Tasha walked away from the scene, she felt the weight of that realization settle in her chest. It was a reminder that every day we all have the choice to make a difference, to stand tall, to act with integrity, to be the kind of people who don't back down no matter the odds. And sometimes it was the quietest moments of courage that spoke the loudest. With each step, Tasha knew she wasn't just walking away from the park. She was walking with the knowledge that her actions had left a mark, and that mark would ripple out, influencing others, shaping the world a little bit more toward the kind of place where respect, kindness, and courage thrived. As Tasha walked deeper into the park, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly faded, replaced by a sense of calm determination. The sirens had long since vanished, and the chaotic energy of the moment had shifted into something more profound, leaving her with a quiet sense of purpose. She took in the familiar sights: children playing, joggers passing by, and families gathered for picnics, and realized that the day, despite its unexpected turmoil, had brought her a deeper understanding of the power of standing firm. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. One of the officers from the scene had caught up with her. She could sense the curiosity in his approach, a subtle shift in his demeanor that spoke volumes. Tasha didn't slow down. She didn't need to. She had nothing more to prove. "Miss Harper," the officer called, his voice respectful. "I just wanted to thank you again for staying so composed. What you did today, it was incredible." Tasha smiled faintly, still focused on the path ahead. "I was just doing what needed to be done," she replied quietly. Her voice carried no arrogance, only the certainty of someone who knew when to act and when to let the situation unfold as it should. The officer fell in step beside her, clearly processing the events. "I've seen situations like that before, where people, escalate things unnecessarily, but you—" He paused, as if looking for the right words. "You didn't let them drag you down to their level. You made sure they knew who was in control without raising a hand." Tasha nodded. She had learned long ago that control didn't always mean exerting force. Sometimes it was about remaining unshaken, about setting boundaries with clarity and without hesitation. It was a lesson from her years of training, but it was also a philosophy that transcended combat. It was about navigating life with intention, about knowing your worth and never letting anyone diminish it. "I guess I just know the importance of recognizing when to walk away," Tasha added, her voice steady. "But sometimes, when the line is crossed, you have to be ready to stand your ground." The officer seemed to digest her words. He gave a small nod. "It's something we all need to learn," he muttered, more to himself than to her. They walked in silence for a while, the peaceful sounds of the park contrasting sharply with the intensity of their earlier encounter. The truth was, Tasha didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't seek praise or recognition. But she understood the power of her actions in that moment, how they had reverberated beyond the park, inspiring others to take control of their own situations, to stand up against intimidation, to reclaim their own power. As they neared the park's entrance, the officer paused, turning to her. "I think you've made a real impact today," he said, his tone genuine. "And I'm not just talking about those guys. I mean everyone who saw what happened. Sometimes it takes something like this to remind people of their strength." Tasha gave him a small smile. "That's the hope," she said, before walking toward the exit. As she crossed the threshold of the park, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The fight had been won, but the true victory was in the ripples she had created. Ripples that would inspire courage, strength, and resilience long after the day was done. In the end, the message was clear. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with fists or force. They are won with courage, composure, and the unwavering commitment to standing for what's right. The power of one individual, standing tall in the face of adversity, could inspire 1,000 others to do the same. Tasha knew this wasn't the last time she'd face a challenge, but she also knew that every time she stood up, whether in the heat of a confrontation or in quiet moments of reflection, she was making a difference. And that, she realized, was the most powerful weapon of all. Her actions had shown everyone that respect, dignity, and strength weren't just qualities to aspire to, they were things you could embody every single day. The next time someone tried to push her around, they would know. Tasha Harper would not back down. The story of Tasha's confrontation in the park teaches us valuable lessons about standing up for ourselves in the face of intimidation. In our daily lives, we often encounter situations where people try to assert power over us, whether in the workplace, social settings, or even in personal relationships. Like Tasha, it's important to recognize when we're being disrespected and when we need to assert our boundaries firmly, yet calmly. This doesn't mean resorting to violence or anger, but rather using the power of composure, confidence, and clear communication. Tasha's ability to stay calm under pressure and handle the situation without escalating it shows the importance of self-discipline and mental strength. It's crucial to be aware of the energy around us and trust our instincts, just as she did when she sensed the shift in the atmosphere caused by the gang. In life, sometimes we will have to confront uncomfortable situations, and it's essential to stand our ground, but always in a way that maintains our dignity and doesn't compromise our values. By handling conflicts with grace and assertiveness, we not only protect ourselves, but also set a standard for how others should treat us. Tasha's actions remind us that we can be powerful without ever raising a hand. Our strength comes from knowing who we are and what we stand for.